Okay, dear folks, this is the second lecture of this class entitled Multiculturalism and Global Perspective. Last week, we did talk about globalization, and I asked you one important question. What is meant, in your opinion, by globalization? I ask you to associate globalization with your mobile phone. Okay? You take out your mobile phone. When you think of your mobile phone, you think of globalization. Because globalization, in that sense, refers to one's ability to move around. Like your mobile phone. You can carry it and walk around. Okay, so globalization has much to do with speed, with mobility. Of course, when we talk about mobility, speed is the key. If you are very slow, of course, you cannot catch up with other people unless you can run, can walk very fast. So bear in mind, globalization, global mobility has much to do with movement. Okay, so in this class, I said to you last time, you take this class for one very simple purpose. You try to learn how to become a mobile person, how to develop your mobility. And for this second lecture, I would like to focus on the so-called multiculturalism. Before we talk about multiculturalism, I think we need to deal with one important but very complicated concept called culture. Actually, culture, easy to read, easy to say, but behind the word itself, the notion, the concept is very complicated. Actually, you could say culture, the word itself has a long history in association with society. Okay? So, what is culture? What do we mean by culture? Another question to ask this question is, what comes to your mind when you think of or when you talk about culture? When you think about culture, does culture remind you of literature? Or does culture remind you of architecture? Or does culture remind you of opera, movie, painting, dancing? In other words, humanities, literature, and fine arts. Does culture refer to literature and fine arts? The answer at the outset is yes. Yes, culture refers to literature. Culture refers to fine arts. In Chinese, culture refers to 文学艺术. There's culture. But today, we also talk about campus culture, 校园文化. We also talk about youth culture, 年轻人文化. We also talk about the culture of working class, 工人的文化. The culture of farmers, 农民的文化. But how could you associate workers, associate farmers with literature, with fine arts? Obviously, it's almost impossible. So, if we just follow the traditional definition of culture by referring culture to literature and fine arts, obviously, we come to realize something is live out. So culture, yes, culture is literature. Yes, culture is fine arts. But literature and culture are not all, literature and fine arts are not all culture. Okay, it's a very important part of culture. Later on, we are going to talk about two different senses of culture. The modern sense of culture, the traditional sense of culture. Okay? Okay, so I just move on with some important and interesting slides here. If I cover the name here, like I cover this, okay? Could you say, oh, this is the portrait of Shakespeare, William Shakespeare? If you cannot say, oh, that's the portrait of William Shakespeare, that shows you do not have enough culture. Because Shakespeare is the greatest writer ever, okay? So this is the, portrait of Shakespeare. So I use this slide just to let you know. A lot of people, when they think of culture, they think of Shakespeare, the greatest writer, okay? This is another interesting, slides. Here is Shakespeare's birthplace. The key point is I want to point out the style of the house. This style, okay? This is called Tudor style. Tudor in Chinese, 都铎, Tudor, 都铎王朝. Tudor actually refers to the reign of all the kings and queens during Shakespeare's time. Don't forget, Shakespeare lived in the time when Queen Elizabeth the First was the queen, was the ruler. Today we have also Queen Elizabeth, but today's queen is Elizabeth II, and during Shakespeare's time, it's Elizabeth I. So when you think of Shakespeare, you think of 伊丽莎白女王一世. You think of, Tudor, 都铎王朝, and the style of his birthplace. Then Stratford upon Avon. Stratford upon Avon. Avon means river. Okay, the city Stratford is located on a river. Okay, so this is where Shakespeare was born. Another interesting picture is here. You see, this is cottage. Cottage doesn't refer to 乡下. Cottage refer to a house. 茅屋, okay? 茅屋. Actually, it's Anne Hathaway's cottage. Who is Anne Hathaway? Shakespeare's wife. Okay, so this is, was where Shakespeare's wife used to live. Okay. Another interesting, thing about culture is when we think about culture, do we think about this? It's an important landscape in London called Westminster Abbey, 西敏寺. Westminster Abbey is important because all the important, events, especially events of the royal family, will be held in Westminster Abbey. Like Princess Diana, when she died, the funeral actually was held in Westminster Abbey. But I use this slide more to point to the style of this abbey. This kind of style with spiral, okay, this kind of style is called Gothic. 哥德式的建筑. Okay, so our question is, when you think about culture, does architecture comes to your mind? Another important, architecture. You see this? This is called Colosseum. In Rome, okay, Italy, Colosseum. At Asia University, we have a building like this, more or less like this, okay? 我们体育馆 built like this. Actually, it was built, using this as a model. This is the inside of Colosseum, Actually, Colosseum remind us a very important, English phrase called Roman holiday. In Chinese, we always say Roman holiday in Roma 假期. But what actually is Roman holiday? What actually is Roman holiday? When Rome ruled the world, okay? When Rome, okay? Roma ruled the world, 统治全世界. When Rome was an empire, actually they need a lot of soldiers to fight for the Roman people. And they use this Colosseum as an occasion, as a place to train the young people to become brave, okay, to know how to fight. So Roman holiday refer to the weekend when all the young people and their family would gather around the corridor here, 这是走廊, sitting here watching the fight between a prisoner, 囚犯, and the fierce wild animals like tigers, like lions, for example. This is called Roman holiday. So this is an important function of the Colosseum. So again, the question for you is, when you think of culture, does this kind of architecture come to your mind? Okay? The Phantom of the Opera, a very famous opera. Okay? Another famous opera by the same, director is called Cat. Okay? It's a very famous one. And actually, this opera was also performed in Taipei more than once. The key point is, when you think of culture, do we think of the Phantom of the Opera? Or this is another, important film called Shakespeare in Love, a movie. When you think of culture, does a certain movie comes to our mind? This is a famous painting called The Creation of Adam, painted by Michelangelo. Michelangelo belonged to the so-called the three greatest artists of the Italian Renaissance. 意大利文艺复兴. Here is, Adam, considered to be the first man on earth, the father of all humankind. And this obviously is the Christian God, okay? And this is the very moment when Adam was created by God, okay? God used his finger, okay? And then Adam come to life. The interesting thing is, if you see Adam's body, you come to realize Adam is more or less like a Superman. Okay? Very tall, very strong, very powerful, with good muscle. Later on, I'm going to talk about this. But I use this slide once again to remind you, when you think of culture, do we have painting in mind. Another famous painting by Michelangelo called The Fall of Man. You see Adam here, and this is Adam's wife, we call Eve. So it's a story between Adam and Eve. What happened to Adam and Eve? You see here, okay? Actually, it's a serpent. It's the devil in the Bible, Satan in the Bible. And then the devil tempts Eve to eat the fruit, the forbidden fruit. Now we know the forbidden fruit is apple, okay? And Eve eats the whole apple. Adam is swallowing the apple. Then because they violate the rules of God, so they were driven out by the angel, driven out of paradise， 把他赶出去人间的乐园 paradise. Again, you see their body. Adam, pretty big. Eve is also very big. How come Michelangelo create Adam and Eve in such a big, huge scale? You can think about this. Why? One simple reason is because the Renaissance marks the beginning of a new focus, of a new emphasis on humanity. In the past, God was considered the center of the universe. With Renaissance, a new concept is introduced. Actually, it's not God that is the center of the universe. Should be human beings. So human beings, Adam and Eve, were portrayed by Michelangelo as two, very powerful, two big human beings. This is a painting by, another famous Renaissance painter called Leonardo da Vinci, Da Vinci. And this painting is called Leda and the Swan. Leda, and this is a swan. Okay? What is happening here is the swan has sex with this girl. Okay? And out of their sexual intercourse, 4 babies were born. One of the baby is named Helen. And a lot of people would argue this painting actually marks the beginning of the Greek civilization. That is the reason why Greek civilization sometimes is called Hellenism. Okay? With Helen as the symbol of the civilization. Another painting by Da Vinci, this is called Annunciation. Annunciation reminds us to announce the good news, to make public a good news. Here we have this young man actually with wings. So you could imagine he is an angel, 天使. And here is Mary, Saint Mary, Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. So this angel comes from the heaven and announce some good news to this girl. This is called Annunciation by Leonardo da Vinci. In other words, a lot of people would argue this painting marks the beginning of the Christian civilization. The previous painting here marks the beginning of Greek civilization. And if you are familiar with Western civilization, of course, before the Christian civilization, we have the Greek civilization first. Okay? Greek civilization lasts more or less roughly 2,000 years. Okay? After 2,000 years, a new civilization was born, and this painting marks, the beginning of the Christian civilization. So again, I use these two paintings just to remind you, when you think of culture, do you have painting in mind? Okay, this is another famous painting by Da Vinci called The Last Supper. Here is Jesus Christ. He has 12 disciples. And this painting talks about the Last Supper Jesus Christ had with his disciple, with his 12 followers, because after the supper, Jesus Christ would be crossed on the nail, would be crucified, okay? And another, important book, not in English, but in Chinese, is called Dream of the Red Chamber. To me, the greatest book written in Chinese. We have Shakespeare. We have Chinese, book called Dream of the Red Chamber. In other words, when you think of culture, do you think of literature again? Another painting by Zhang Daqian. When you think of culture, do you think of painting by Zhang Daqian? This is Dance by Lin Huaimin. Okay? 云门舞集. Or when you think about, literature, culture, do you have Jimmy, okay? 微笑的鱼 in mind. Now we move to another concept of culture. These are the ways of life about the Eskimos, 爱斯基摩人, their way of life. So I use these two slides just to remind you, actually, culture refers to literature, culture refers to fine arts, but culture also refers to ways of life, 生活方式. In other words, when we talk about culture, we have two different meanings, two different sets of culture in mind. Culture traditionally refer to literature, refer to fine arts. But in its modern sense, culture refer to a certain way of life. And this is the way of life of the Eskimos. This is in Scotland, you see, this is a certain way of life of the Scottish people, okay? This is in Taiwan, Bunong, okay? This is their way of life, their ceremony. This is the Tibetans, okay? Xizang, Tibetans, okay? Their way of life. This is the Japanese way of life, okay? This is a book by Wu Xianghui talking about the Irish people. So I use this to remind you another broader modern sense of culture. In other words, you might think of culture as a way of life, not just literature, not just fine arts. Okay? So here, we have culture is literature and fine arts. That's the reason why in Taiwan, in France, in other countries as well, we do have Minister of Culture, 文化部. When we talk about Minister of Culture, of course, the minister has a certain, territory, has a certain jurisdiction, 辖区. Not everything is culture. If everything is culture, then culture is nothing. No. When we talk about culture, the first sense of culture is literature and fine arts. And I use a lot of slot just to emphasize the point that culture refers to literature and fine arts. But another way to read culture is culture refers to a whole way of life, material way of life, intellectual way of life, and spiritual way of life. So for this lecture, I just want to emphasize two senses of culture. When we talk about culture, bear in mind culture traditionally refers to literature and fine arts. Another sense of culture refers to a whole way of life. So today, when we talk about student culture, 学生文化, refer to what? Way of life of students at a university. For example, we talk about student culture at Asia University, 亚洲大学文化. You are all students at Asia University, for example. Tell me how you live in the school dormitory, how you study, how you spend your free time, how you join extracurricular activities. All this refer to your way of life. This is called student culture at Asia University. If we argue culture only refers to literature and fine arts, then it's very difficult for us to argue for student culture at Asia University. 学生不是文学家，学生不是艺术家。How could they have student culture? So here, when we talk about student culture, we refer to students' way of life, their material of life, their intellectual way of life, their spiritual or emotional way of life. Okay, emotional way of life, or their belief system too. 学生的信仰体系 For example, this is all culture. So to get to the root of culture, actually the word culture itself comes from Latin. 拉丁文 comes from Latin. Cultura. Okay? Cultura actually comes from colera, meaning what? To cultivate. To cultivate means to grow, to take care of. Okay? So culture refers to cultivate. Cultivate what? Cultivate the plants, cultivate the flowers, to grow the plant, to grow the flowers. If you grow a plant, so plant, 植物, of course, you need to give good soil, 好的泥土. You need to have sunshine, 阳光. You need to have water, for example. Then you also need what? Soil, sunshine, water. Sometimes you might need to have fertilizer, 肥料. That's how to take good care of a plant, of a flower. Later on, by taking care of a flower, a plant, we extend the meaning to take care of animals. Like you take care of your pets, 宠物. Then a lot of people begin to think, if you take such good care of plants, flowers, animals, how about human beings? Do we need to take good care of human beings? 对植物、动物都照顾得好好的，那对人要不要照顾啊？ So, by extension, to cultivate, not just to cultivate the flower, not to just cultivate the plants, not just to cultivate animals, but also to cultivate human beings. So now you come to realize how come culture refer to literature? How come culture refer to fine arts? What do we need? Of course, we need food. We need water. We need clothes. We need shelter. But we also need something that is important for our brain, for our intellect. We also need something that is important for our mind. Something that is important for our soul, 灵魂, mind, brain. So a lot of people begin to think, okay, what is needed by human being? Okay, they need literature to enrich their mind. They need, fine arts to enrich their mind. So that is the reason why traditionally culture refer to literature and fine arts. Okay? So culture in its early stage refer to a process, meaning cultivating or taking care of plants and animals. This is the original meaning of culture. Okay? But in the 19th century, culture is becoming more and more an important concept. Okay? Because at that time, culture, okay, always associated with the Industrial Revolution. 工业革命. Why culture has much to do with Industrial Revolution? Of course, Industrial Revolution create new wealth, create a new class called capitalists. But when human beings became wealthier, when human beings became rich, people start to think, now we are happy with the material life, but we still need something more to enrich us. So aside from material life, we think about intellectual life. We think about, emotional life. We think about spiritual life. And something that is good for our emotion, something that is good for our spirit is what culture can provide. This is why culture is put in the Western context of the 19th century. So we have culture as a way to fight against industry, to fight against anything that is associated with industry. Also, culture is used as a way to get rid of the concept of social class. And an important author in terms of culture in this sense is Matthew Arnold. Okay? A 19th century thinker, especially one of his important books called Culture and Anarchy. Okay? This is something for you to read if you are interested in the concept of culture as a way to get rid of anarchy. Okay? So Matthew Arnold has an important definition of culture. What is meant by culture by Matthew Arnold? Culture being a pursuit of our total perfection. It's a pursuit of perfection. Like 大学之道止于至善. Okay? By means of getting to know on all the matters which most concern us, the best which been thought and said in the world. This is Matthew Arnold's definition of culture, the best which has been thought and said in the world. Here, of course, refer to literature, refer to, fine arts. So Matthew Arnold was still thinking very much in the line of culture as literature, culture as fine arts. This is another important definition of culture. It's UNESCO. Everybody knows UNESCO. 联合国文教组织. Okay? One of the very important, organization of the United Nations. In the year 2002, UNESCO has a very good definition of culture, and I believe this definition is still used today when we talk about culture. According to UNESCO, what is meant by culture? culture should be regarded as the set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society of a social group. So culture refers to the way of life of a certain social group, especially in terms of spiritual, in terms of material, in terms of intellectual, in terms of emotional. So culture, it includes, in addition to art and literature, we just talked about art and literature, culture should also include lifestyles, 生活方式, should also include way of living, should also include value system, tradition, and beliefs. I think UNESCO has the most comprehensive definition of culture. In other words, this is what culture is meant in modern sense. Culture refer to literature. Culture refer to, art, but also culture refer to ways of living together. Okay. So now, once again, you might raise another important question. What we are going to learn in this class, or why this class is offered? Actually, to me, this class is offered for one important reason. We try to cultivate the so-called cultural literacy as an important part of your competence. Cultural literacy. What does it mean by cultural literacy? Literacy refers to the ability to read and write. Okay? Then cultural. Your ability to read anything that is related to culture. I just give you one example. We often hear about this expression, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Do you know where does this phrase originate? Where does this phrase come from? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Why we have to do as the Romans do when we are in Rome? So if you know where this phrase originates, where this phrase comes from, it shows that you have very good cultural literacy. Okay, so this is, I think, could be my last piece for this lecture. We call P21st Framework for 21st Century Learning. Okay, as a young person in the 21st century, you see, you need to have life and career skills. Okay, you need to have learning and innovation skills, the so-called 4 C's, like, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity. And you also need to have some knowledge in information, in media, in technology skills. So these 3 important. But another key is the 3 R's, 3 R's. Okay, so 3 R's is the core. And then you have the surrounding 3 different skills. And then these are the so-called supporting system. This shows a very good framework of 21st century learning. Okay? Sorry, this is in Chinese, but I just want to say, when you talk about a person's cultivation, a person's competence, we always refer to 3 things. The first one is your morality, your personality. The last one is your professional knowledge, your professional skill. But in between is your cultural literacy. In other words, this is something for you to cultivate by yourself at home through your parents. This is something for you to cultivate at school, in the university. You cultivate your profession, skills. You cultivate your moral sense But in between, you also need to develop your cultural literacy. And that is the reason why, for this class, we also talk about cultural literacy, what is meant by cultural literacy. Okay, so I think, this is something for us to say about literature. So once again, when you think about literature, you need to have two senses of literature in mind. The traditional sense of literature, refer to literature and fine arts. Then the modern sense of culture, refer to way of life. Not just spiritual, also intellectual, also emotional, and emotional, spiritual, but also material. Yes, also material. Okay, so this is the end of this lecture. Thank you. Okay, finally, I would like to end this class by recommend you to read a book if you have the time. Actually, it's a book by Jim Rogers, one of the very well-known famous investors of the 21st century. Actually, it's not a book. It's collection of 12 letters written by Jim Rogers to his very young daughter. Don't forget, Jim Rogers gave birth to this young daughter when he was already 60 years old. So he was thinking, when he died, the two daughters might still be very young. They might not be able to know what their fathers think. Okay? So he decided to write 12 letters to the daughters. And we have a very good translation called 投资大师给宝贝女儿12封信. It's translated by Hong Lan. Okay? A very good scholar in neuroscience, 神经科学, 认知科学, also a very good translator. In this particular book, Jim Rogers in particular asked his daughter to read what? To read philosophy. Hard for us to imagine that an investor would ask his daughter the very first thing to learn is philosophy. Because he argues, if the daughter reads philosophy, then he'll learn how to think independently. Independent thinking. Okay? Then another advice to the daughter is also something very unusual. Asking the daughter to read history. This is something for us to think, how come an investor would ask a daughter to read history? But I think one important reason is history repeats itself with variation. Okay, so through history, we learn from the past to cope with the present or the future. Okay, so these two important, slides about, the book written by Jim Rogers to her daughter, and then we talk about literacy, cultural literacy, culture and literacy. Okay, cultural literacy. In other words, what is literacy and what is cultural literacy, and why we need to take this class? Because literacy refers to ability to read and write, and cultural literacy means your ability to be able to read cultures from different countries, culture from different world. So back to our title of the class, multiculturalism. Your ability to read culture from different perspectives. And I think this is the end of this lecture. Thank you.